I'm on the porch, coffee in hand, watching two middle-aged men in knockoff tactical vests zip-tie my teenage son's wrists like he's a fugitive. They're not cops. They're not even rent cops. They're from an HOA I've never signed up for, and they're dragging him across my gravel driveway while yelling, "We have jurisdiction!" He's screaming for me. I'm dialing the real sheriff. The funny part? That's his dad, and this is about to get personal. Now, if you're wondering how it got this bad, you're not alone. 10 minutes ago, I was grilling breakfast sausage and arguing with my coffee maker. Now I'm watching Caleb, my 17-year-old son and honor roll student, get manhandled by two men whose only authority comes from clipboards and matching khakis. One of them is shouting HOA statutes like it's the Constitution. The other is trying not to trip over our garden hose while dragging my kid like he's bagged a deer. And me? I'm still barefoot on the porch, contemplating whether I should call the sheriff first or the news station. This started a few weeks ago, when Karen moved into the house behind ours. You know the type: sharp bob, pearls, a voice like an automated phone line, and a clipboard surgically attached to her arm. Within 72 hours of moving in, she declared herself interim president of the HOA. Never mind that our property isn't in their jurisdiction. Never mind that we live on a legacy parcel zoned rural with its own water rights and separate easement. No, Karen had decided that we were in visual alignment with the community's aesthetic values and therefore, she had the right to govern us. I laughed. Caleb didn't. He's got a short fuse for people who think a title gives them power. Probably got that from me. The first time Karen tried something, she left a printed violation notice in our mailbox. No return address, just a blurry HOA logo and a list of alleged infractions: unpermitted fencing, motorized vehicles on private land, and proper landscaping. The fencing is barbed wire, standard for livestock containment. The vehicles? Dirt bikes on Caleb's track out back, on land that's been ours for 3 generations. Landscaping? It's a drought-resistant garden with solar irrigation. But facts, as usual, didn't matter to Karen. What mattered was control. A week later, she marched up our driveway uninvited and started taking photos of our shed. Then she shouted at Caleb for operating an unauthorized off-road vehicle within city limits. He was riding a battery-powered pit bike at 2 miles an hour, wearing a helmet, on our own dirt. Caleb responded, explaining how this wasn't city limits and how she should back off before someone got hurt tripping over her own sense of entitlement. I admit I chuckled. Karen did not. She marched off, muttering something about bylaws and community harmony. I figured it would stop there. It didn't. We started getting daily letters. Then came the warning signs posted at the edge of our property, trespass notices printed on HOA letterhead, nailed into our fence posts like they had any right. Then last night, Caleb found someone snooping near the shed. They ran when he turned on the floodlight, but not before he got a blurry shot of a polo shirt and cargo shorts. That brings us to this morning, to the sound of Caleb yelling, metal clinking, and 2 HOA wannabes zip-tying my son in our own driveway like he's the season finale of some true crime show. As I yell for them to stop, one of the guys turns around and holds up a laminated ID badge that says, Community Enforcement Officer. It's printed on regular printer paper. I've seen higher security clearance on grocery store receipts. I tell them to release my son immediately. Karen appears out of nowhere, standing on the edge of her perfectly edged lawn, arms folded, phone in hand like she's documenting a wildlife rescue. We warned you, she says. He was violating Section 3 of the HOA's behavioral mandates regarding minor safety. I asked her if she's completely lost her mind. She responds that we've been notified multiple times and that this is the last straw. I don't yell. I don't threaten. I just say one thing. Hey Siri, call Sheriff Sam. And it's like the wind shifted. Karen's face changes. One of the fake enforcers says, Wait, did he say sheriff? And I say it again, louder for dramatic effect. Sheriff Sam, you know, the guy who officiated my son's Little League games, the guy who grilled ribs at our 4th of July cookout. Caleb, still zip-tied but now standing, smirks. Sam picks up on the second ring. I keep my tone calm, like I'm reporting a pothole. Hey Sam, yeah, so I've got a couple of HOA cowboys zip-tying Caleb on my driveway. They claim they've got jurisdiction. Thought you might want to weigh in before I start pulling legal triggers. There's a long pause on the other end, and then Sam says, Hold tight, I'll be there in 5. Keep the porch warm. Karen starts to shift on her feet. This was a lawful HOA intervention, she says suddenly, sounding less confident. We were well within our rights. One of the men untangles Caleb's arm by accident, and he uses the distraction to pull free. He doesn't run. He stands there, arms still marked from the zip ties, and says, You people are insane. Karen flinches. 5 minutes later, we hear the sirens. 2 cruisers pull up, gravel spraying. Sheriff Sam steps out like he's arriving at a barbecue. He walks up slow, takes one look at Caleb, another at the tactical twins, and then zeroes in on Karen. Ma'am, did you just detain the sheriff's kid? She opens her mouth, probably to spew some HOA garbage, but nothing comes out. Sam turns to me and says, Want me to arrest all 3, or do you want to file charges first? I say, Let's not jump straight to charges. I sip my coffee. I've got a better idea. Karen looks hopeful for a split second, but she's about to learn I'm not being merciful, I'm being patient. Because if she thinks this land falls under her HOA's jurisdiction, she's about to find out what happens when you treat a veteran, a father, and the sheriff's best friend like some lawn decoration you can move around. What she doesn't know yet. I've already been laying the groundwork, and this morning was the last nudge I needed to start something she can't stop. Tomorrow, I make it official. Let's see how the HOA handles being legally trespassed from the land they think they own. The next morning, I didn't sleep in while Karen probably sipped her iced coffee and drafted another fake violation form. I was already on the phone with my lawyer. Not the billboard kind. Mine's the quiet, khaki-wearing, county-savvy guy who's more interested in loopholes than lawsuits. I explained the whole situation, the zip ties, the attempted detainment, the HOA's imaginary jurisdiction. He chuckled once, dry and slow, then said, Want to make it permanent? I told him I was done playing defense. We scheduled a meeting for noon. I spent the next few hours gathering every single document that I proved my property wasn't under their HOA charter, deeds, maps, surveyor reports, and the original exemption agreement from decades ago, signed back when Karen was probably still learning how to spell. Jurisdiction. My grandfather had this land zoned for agricultural and private residence use back when the area was still unincorporated scrub. It wasn't until the cookie-cutter neighborhoods popped up that the HOA ever got involved, and even then, they skipped us for good reason. At noon sharp, I met with the lawyer at his office. I handed him a binder full of originals and copies, plus the printed photos Caleb had taken the night someone trespassed near the shed. He glanced through the file, nodding slowly. You know, he said, not only do you have full legal standing to block them out, you've got enough here to issue a formal cease and desist, plus a petition to force them to acknowledge the boundary. I asked how long that would take. He raised an eyebrow and said, I've already emailed the county registrar. By the time I got back home, Caleb had finished spray painting the fence panels we picked up last week, giant metal barriers with reinforced steel posts. We hadn't installed them yet, but after yesterday, there was no reason to wait. I grabbed my post digger, he grabbed the auger, and we started planting steel like we were prepping for a siege. Karen, of course, showed up around hour 2. She waddled over with her phone recording and that same smug expression she wears when she thinks she's documenting a civil infraction. I waved politely. She didn't return the favor. You're not allowed to erect a wall over 4 feet without HOA clearance, she said, smug as ever. I smiled. We're not under the HOA. She sniffed. That's still under community guidelines. I leaned on my shovel and gave her the kind of look that says, Lady, please. This fence, I said slowly, isn't just legal, it's about to be county approved. You want to check the permit list next week? Feel free. That caught her off guard, I could tell, because her nose twitched and her voice got shriller. You can't just ignore the rules because you don't like them, she shouted. Funny, I said. That's exactly what I thought when you zip-tied my son. That shut her up for a second. The next day, the cease and desist went live. It was hand-delivered to the HOA board, with a copy sent directly to Karen's address, certified and time-stamped. It stated plainly that they had no authority over our parcel, that any further attempts to enforce their rules would be considered harassment and trespassing, and that any physical intervention would be grounds for civil and criminal charges. My lawyer also slipped in a lovely phrase I'll never forget. Any continued contact or surveillance initiated by the HOA will constitute an intentional act of malice. Karen had to look that one up, but she didn't back down. That would have required logic. No, she escalated. She called in a city zoning official to inspect for violations, claiming our motocross track was unpermitted and dangerous. The poor guy showed up in a city car and looked more confused than concerned. After 2 minutes of walking the property, he looked up and said, "Your county zoned this. It's all legal. You could run a rodeo out here if you wanted." Karen followed him the entire time like she thought he just hadn't noticed something illegal yet. At one point, she tried to say the dirt bikes were causing sound pollution. He asked if she lived within 200 feet. She said no. He shrugged and left. I offered him a soda. He took 2. Then she tried the health angle. Claimed Caleb's dirt track was kicking up dust that was hazardous to senior residents. She even brought it up during an HOA meeting, and apparently had the gall to refer to us as the problematic outliers. I know this because one of the board members sent me a transcript. Turns out not everyone on the HOA loves Karen. Some of them are just tired retirees who wanted a nice lawn and ended up with a suburban dictator. I printed out that transcript and hung it in the garage. Caleb highlighted his favorite quote in yellow. I worry we've given Karen too much leeway. Meanwhile, I took things up a notch. I paid a local surveyor to remark every edge of our property, bold, fluorescent painted stakes, laser measured to the inch. Then I installed motion-triggered lights on the new fence line and added trail cameras that upload straight to my cloud. Anyone comes near our property again without permission, I'll know about it before they've even made it to the gate. A few days after the cameras went up, Caleb caught someone walking along the outside of the fence with a clipboard and a measuring tape. Guess who? Our favorite HOA vigilante, back at it. She was measuring the height of our privacy slats. Caleb didn't even yell, he just turned on the sprinklers, fully automated, full pressure. She shrieked like a wet cat and ran back across the cul-de-sac, looking like she lost a shampoo commercial in the middle of filming. The footage from the camera, I may or may not have turned it into a slow-motion GIF and used it as my phone wallpaper. Caleb asked if he could post it. I told him to wait until it was legally safe. That GIF is now titled Karen Retreats 2025. But then, last night, I noticed something different. A small group of cars was parked outside the HOA clubhouse late, well past any reasonable meeting time. Lights on, silhouettes moving. The next morning, a folded flyer showed up at our gate. Not from Karen, from the HOA board itself. It read in stiff, formal type. Dear property owner, we apologize for any misunderstanding caused by overreach from certain individuals. We acknowledge the boundary limitations and respect the separation of your land from HOA jurisdiction. There was one line that really stuck out. We are currently reviewing the conduct of recent board leadership and reevaluating our internal enforcement protocols. Translation: Karen was on thin ice. They weren't defending her anymore. They were covering their own tails. I should have felt satisfied, but I didn't, not yet. Because Karen wasn't backing off, she was just going quiet. And that's worse. Because people like her, when they go quiet, they're not surrendering, they're planning. Which is why I didn't let my guard down when I noticed a new security sign posted at her front lawn. It read, HOA Surveillance Zone. All activity recorded. The sign looked brand new, but the funny thing was, there weren't any cameras, at least not ones I could see. As I stared at it from my front porch, I realized something. Karen wasn't done. She was just getting smarter. And whatever she was planning next, it was coming soon. It started with the dog. Not mine. Karen's. Some purebred fluff ball with a bark like a smoke alarm and the kind of entitled yip that only a pampered lap dog could produce. At exactly 5:30 every morning for 3 days straight, that thing positioned itself at the corner of her fence closest to my son's window and shrieked at nothing. No squirrels. No passing cars. Just a completely empty yard. It was so. Caleb thought she trained it on a timer. I wouldn't put it past her. By day 4, I caught her peeking through the slats of her privacy hedge while sipping a protein shake. She didn't even flinch when I waved. She just turned around like she had completed some invisible morning ritual. I told Caleb to let it go. He grumbled about sleep and high school and installing a white noise cannon, but it wasn't just the dog. The HOA sign started creeping closer, like, "Coo, we found one stuck in the gravel near our driveway." Another was wedged into the hedge beside our gate, all printed on the same cheap poster board, all with slight variations of the same threatening language: community rules enforced. HOA jurisdiction applicable. Compliance required. I tore each one down and logged the time and date. Karen's surveillance sign had also multiplied. Now there were 3, one of which had blinking red lights attached. The cameras still didn't exist, it was all theater. But the fact that she kept doubling down after the HOA board had started backing away told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't doing this for them, she was doing it for herself. The board wasn't pulling her strings, she was pulling theirs, or trying to. And when they started cutting the rope, she decided to take things into her own hands. So I did the same. I filed an updated property boundary declaration through the county office, adding a layer of land use protection specific to educational and agricultural activity. In plain terms, that meant Caleb's motocross training track, because it was being used to develop a scholarship project, was now legally protected as an educational pursuit. That meant any interference could be interpreted as an attempt to obstruct academic development. Karen had no idea what kind of legal firepower she was up against, but I was more than happy to let her walk face first into it. I also contacted the local animal control office and filed a formal complaint about the dog. Not for barking, that was just annoying, but because I suspected it was being used for harassment. I submitted a video of the dog barking for 8 minutes straight with no visible trigger, and included timestamps for 3 consecutive mornings. I didn't expect much to come from it, but it was another drop in the bucket. Then came the concrete. One morning, I found a fresh wet slab poured at the edge of our shared easement, right where the access road began. It hadn't been there the night before. There was a little orange cone in the middle and a sign that read Community Security Improvement Zone. I don't know who she thought she was fooling. There's no such thing as a community improvement zone on private easement land, and the only security improvement that cemented rectangle provided was a fresh tripping hazard. I called the county. They came out, took photos, and confirmed there was no record of any authorized construction. The concrete was illegal. Karen tried to play dumb when they knocked on her door, but I could hear her defensive tone all the way from my porch. The best part was when one of the county reps asked if she had a permit, and she said she thought a verbal acknowledgement from the board president counted. The look on their faces said everything. She wasn't just wrong, she was embarrassing herself in official records. By now, Caleb had started referring to her as General HOA and treated every new development like a level in a video game. The dog became the alarm system boss. The concrete slab? A mini-boss obstacle. We were clearly reaching the part of the story where the villain starts unraveling, and I was almost disappointed it hadn't happened in a more dramatic way. But that changed when I got the letter. It came in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the HOA logo on the header, poorly photocopied. It said we were being fined $500 for willful disruption of community order. No details. No signature. No payment method. Just the amount, and a vague threat of further enforcement if ignored. I scanned it and emailed it straight to my lawyer, who responded with exactly 7 words. "That's the worst fake fine I've seen." He told me to ignore it, document everything, and wait. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, I saw flashlights moving along the outside of our fence. Not casual walkers. These were deliberate movements, up, down, pause, angle, repeat. Caleb spotted it too and quietly stepped outside with his phone. He hit record and zoomed in. 2 men, one with a clipboard, the other with a small measuring wheel. Again with the measurement. Caleb whispered, "What are they even trying to prove?" I whispered back, "That they have any authority at all." We didn't confront them. We just filmed them. The next morning, I emailed the footage to the HOA board and asked one question. "Are these your people?" The response came a few hours later, a short email that read, "No, and we'll handle it." That was the first time they hadn't defended her. It was the first time I believed they were actually trying to reel her in. But Karen wasn't someone who reeled in easily. I figured if anything, she'd escalate again, and she did. I came home from the hardware store to find a code enforcement officer standing at my front gate. Not someone I knew. He looked uncomfortable, said he was responding to a report of unauthorized electrical equipment. I showed him the wiring for the gate lights, standard, all permitted. He nodded, took some photos, and apologized, saying he'd closed the case. I asked who filed the complaint. He shrugged, but I already knew. Karen had switched tactics, moving from physical presence to bureaucratic warfare. The problem with that? I'd already beaten her at it twice. But just when I thought I'd figured out her pattern, she changed the game again. Caleb came running into the kitchen one afternoon, phone in hand. "Dad, check the Facebook group." I raised an eyebrow. He flipped the screen around. It was the HOA community forum. A new post from Karen. It said, "Our community is under attack. Non-compliant members are spreading misinformation and engaging in activities that threaten neighborhood safety and values. We must take a stand. Emergency meeting at the clubhouse tonight. Attendance mandatory." She had turned it political. She was rallying, trying to turn the neighborhood against us with whatever half-baked theories she was peddling. I stared at the screen for a long minute, then said, "Well, looks like she just handed us her final play. Time to show up." We arrived at the emergency HOA meeting 15 minutes early. Not because we were eager, but because I wanted the front row. I wanted Karen to see me the moment she walked in with whatever speech she'd rehearsed in the mirror that morning. Caleb came along, of course, arms crossed, hoodie up, with that teenage look of quiet vengeance. The room itself was a beige rectangle, folding chairs, a podium, a sad pot of fake flowers on the table near the front. About 20 residents were already seated, some chatting, some bored, some clearly annoyed that their evening had been hijacked by suburban theatrics. A few nodded at me as I walked in. An older gentleman gave me a thumbs up. I didn't know his name, but I knew that look. That was the look of someone who was tired of Karen's nonsense but didn't want to get his hands dirty. She arrived 5 minutes late, carrying a stack of papers, flanked by 2 of her loyal clipboard henchmen. The second she saw us, her face twitched just a little, not fear, not surprise, just irritation that we weren't playing our part and staying home like she'd probably hoped. She tried to keep her focus on the podium, but I could feel the way she was adjusting her speech on the fly. I could practically hear the gears grinding. She cleared her throat dramatically and began. "We are gathered tonight," she said, "to discuss a growing concern that affects not just our community's aesthetic, but our collective safety." Someone coughed. Another person muttered, "Here we go." She pushed forward. "Certain individuals, while technically residing adjacent to our neighborhood, have been engaged in behaviors that violate the spirit of our bylaws. These behaviors include unregulated vehicle use, visual pollution, noise disturbances, and aggressive refusal to comply with community requests." I raised my hand. She ignored it. She went on, spinning this fantasy where Caleb's dirt bike track was some kind of post-apocalyptic training zone, where we were arming ourselves with spotlights and fences to intimidate neighbors, where I was threatening legal action as a tool of dominance. She even referenced the dog incident, claiming we used water as a deterrent against vulnerable pets. I laughed out loud at that one. A few people did too. She didn't like that. When she finally paused to take a breath and shuffle her papers, I stood up. I didn't ask for the floor, I just started talking. That was cute, I said. But now let's talk about reality. She sputtered, tried to interrupt, but the HOA board president, who had been silent until now, held up a hand and said, "Let's hear him out." That was new. I walked to the front of the room, pulled a thick manila folder from under my arm, and dropped it on the table with a satisfying thud. "This," I said, "is a comprehensive set of documents proving that my property is not under this HOA's jurisdiction. Deeds, parcel maps, historical charter exclusions, county certifications. It's been verified by 2 lawyers and the county clerk." I opened the folder slowly, like I was revealing evidence in court. "Additionally," I continued, "this is a copy of the cease and desist letter issued to the HOA by legal counsel, which, by the way, your president acknowledged receipt of." The president nodded. Karen's face was draining of color. "Just for fun," I said, flipping through another folder. "This is a formal complaint filed with the Sheriff's Department regarding the unlawful detainment of my minor son by 2 individuals who claim to be HOA enforcers, either of whom had any legal right to step foot on my land." I paused. "Oh, and here's the video footage of that incident in case anyone wants to see what impersonating an officer looks like." The room went silent. I scanned their faces. Some were stunned, some clearly furious that they'd been dragged into this mess. Karen was shaking now, visibly, but trying to mask it with righteous indignation. "This meeting is not a courtroom," she said. "This is about community values." I turned to her and smiled. "No, this is about your inability to accept limits. You created an alternate version of the truth and then tried to enforce it like you were queen of the cul-de-sac. You dragged my son across my property in zip ties. You installed fake signs. You poured illegal concrete. You harassed us for weeks, and now, because none of that worked, you're trying to win the court of public opinion." I leaned in slightly. "But you forgot something. Most of these people live here because they don't want drama. And you are the walking embodiment of it." One woman in the second row raised her hand and asked the board president if they could issue a formal vote on removing Karen as HOA chair. The president looked surprised, then glanced around. A few hands shot up, then a few more. Within 30 seconds, it was nearly unanimous. Karen looked like she'd just been pushed out of a plane without a parachute. She protested, of course. Said the vote was invalid, said the rules weren't being followed, said I had no right to speak at an HOA meeting. But her voice had lost its bite. The president said, "You've made this neighborhood a target. You've lied, forged letters, and taken things way too far. You're relieved of your role, pending official vote and review." That last part was for legal protection, but everyone in the room knew what it meant. Karen was done. After the meeting, as people packed up and filtered out, I felt more hands shake mine than I'd expected. One man offered to help reinforce the fence line. A woman gave Caleb a high five. The mood had shifted. Whatever spell Karen had been casting, it broke under the weight of real facts and community fatigue. But the best moment came the next day. We were outside loading scrap wood into the truck when a county crew pulled up. Turns out, the HOA board had filed a request to have the illegal concrete slab removed quietly, without involving Karen. The workers jackhammered it to pieces, loaded it up, and were gone within an hour. I stood there watching the mess disappear, coffee in hand, just like the day this whole thing started. Caleb came up beside me, holding the old HOA violation signs he'd collected over the week. "What should we do with these?" he asked. I smiled. "Let's use them for target practice." A week later, Karen's house went up for sale. The listing didn't mention her name, but everyone knew, and no one in the neighborhood shed a tear. As for us, we kept building the track. Caleb got an interview offer from a college that saw the story online. And me? I finally installed a hammock behind the barn, just far enough from the road that no one can see it. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't loud.